It all started with an innocent, simple desire to see the outside world, a world that was beyond their own. But where Sora, Riku and Kairi's desire all originally stemmed from the same place, that being Kairi's mysterious origin, what drove them forward were different. Riku was obsessed with seeing the outside world to gain the strength to protect, and was insistent to help Hikari to find where she came from, also likely wanting to gain her affection in the process. But this wasn't something Hikari ever asked for. While she was curious, it was only secondary to her present connections. So seeing Riku view his home, the one she had come to find happiness in with the two of them so indifferently, rubbed her the wrong way. Whereas Sora simply wanted to expand his horizons, not to replace his home, but to experience and grow beyond it. Among the two, Sora's perspective was one she could find comfort in, which is why she impulsively wanted to leave the island with just the two of them together. And in the most twisted way possible, they all got what they wanted, at least to an extent. Whether it be because of the consciousness of darkness granting them what they last desired before setting out, with Riku giving up his home for something greater, Sora exploring the many worlds and Kairi with Sora, or the island was simply the next world to be consumed among many, for better or worse, that was the beginning of their journey. Despite Sora being the last one to get on the island, he was the one that put his friends and home first over the adventure, searching for each one of them immediately. While Riku openly discarded his home, parents and existing connections was something beyond what he knows, for strength, forcing his ideals on his friends without listening to them, reaching out to Sora so he could follow him on that path, while Sora would simply reach out to a friend in danger, opposing intents that would define their paths moving forward, accepting the darkness that would give him what he wished. Ironically, the weapon of strength Riku was originally destined to receive out of his desire to protect would choose Sora, the one that didn't forsake his connections for power, knowledge and darkness. In a completely new world, Sora would find himself directionless and constantly fighting against the darkness that Riku had aligned himself with, experiencing the worst it had to offer, from the destruction of his home to the terrifying nature of heartlessness. But it wasn't all doom and gloom, coming across those that were in the same situation as him, lost but still hopeful, still persevering. Through making new connections, he found direction, finding a compromise in goals between his new friends, to find those that were important to them together. Contrasting this would be the villains of the many worlds. While on the same side with a mutual goal, they were not truly together, as they were too prideful, bickering and disagreeing, making no compromise with each other and carrying out their schemes alone. They had numbers and knowledge, yet they would all meet their demise by the same three people in such similar ways. They had no connection, and if they shared anything in common outside of their villainy, it was that they were all being used by Maleficent. Traveling to all these new worlds, Sora would both grow his current connections with Donald and Goofy and make plenty of new ones. And through these new connections he came to understand the nature of a heart, both at its worst and best, and learnt important lessons along the way. He learned that injustice was worth defying, even if it's against all odds. Even if Alice and Sora had no authority over the matter or right to meddle, there would be no regrets in helping those that needed it moving forward, protecting not just the hearts of worlds, but just as importantly, those that resided in it. He learned that his strength came from his friends both figuratively and literally, defeating Cloud who forsook himself and his own connections for power, surpassing even Hercules' indomitable might even if Sora was physically alone, because metaphorically, he wasn't. He learned to value all his friends that were made along the way, not just his old ones, and the ramifications of forgetting that. He learned that the true value of a person didn't come from their fame, power or wealth, but what came from their character within. He learned not to take the things he had for granted, and while pursuing one's personal goals, in this case, exploring the outside world may put the things they have at risk, they weren't mutually exclusive, so long that one finds a balance between appreciating what they have and pursuing their personal goals. He learned that a heart is far more complicated than what science could ever explain. Opposing yet reinforcing all these different lessons, and plenty of others I haven't mentioned, would be those who've lost themselves to darkness, strengthening Sora's aversion towards it. Observing his friend from a distance, Riku did not take kindly to Sora's development, feeling replaced by his new friends. Influencing these thoughts of jealousy was Maleficent, painting the narrative that Sora no longer cared for Riku and Kairi anymore, as his methods of finding Kairi were inefficient and seemed to lack urgency, when in reality, he became friends with Donald and Goofy to find his lost friends, always thinking and putting them first. If anything, his new experiences have strengthened his feelings for his old connections, appreciating his friends more than ever. And he was actually living to Riku's words at the start of the story, that they were simply a little piece of something greater, never putting himself above others for personal gain, words that Sora would repeat much later in his defining moments. And he had already seen for himself the consequences of failing to uphold the ideal in Deep Jungle. But Riku never saw it that way, and would contradict those words, putting himself above others and using any connection he had as tools, cutting off any genuine bonds to gain power like Maleficent. Instead of treating Pinocchio with equality and understanding, he forcefully used him, dehumanizing him as an object to be studied. For personal gain, he used any connection he had as efficiently as possible, no matter the consequences, and he was ultimately rewarded for that, obtaining power and finding Hikari far sooner than Sora, who wouldn't compromise his connections. But whether or not it was more effective remains to be seen, and to a boy that kept all his new connections at arm's length, he never saw the ramifications of darkness for himself, only the short-term benefits to his goals, so he would keep walking down that path. Entering Hollow Bastion, we are met with Beast and a conflict of interest. While Riku and Beast were so similar in goals, wanting to save the one they cherished, Beast hadn't compromised his heart or other connections to get what he wanted. Ironically, of the two, Riku was the one acting less human. Attempting to help him, Sora would step in, only to have his Keyblade taken away and returned to the original wielder, surprised that the person he looked up to would use him. By overvaluing the Keyblade and failing to realize what had helped them succeed throughout the story, Donald and Goofy would blindly follow the key, and Sora, who also fell victim to this, could not challenge Riku on his contradictions, not yet. But through sharing just a small connection with Beast, he could pick himself up again. Stripped of the Keyblade, he rediscovered where his strength came from through Beast's help, conveyed through the gameplay in which Beast would deal the most damage on the way to reach Riku. Embracing his connections, even those that left him, Sora remembered what he learned in Olympus and Agrabah, that his strength and value came from his friendship and character, things that were intangible, not the key, helping Donald and Goofy remember where theirs came from as well. They weren't just temporary partners anymore bound by orders, they were best friends. And it was the strength of all the connections that won back the key permanently, defeating Riku, who did not have the same resolve nor experience. He wanted strength to protect what was important, but what fueled those once innocent ambitions would be now of jealousy, and what was once kindness was now possessive, leading him to use his best friend as a delivery boy and raising his blade against him, overvaluing power over his friendship. That contradiction was what made him weaker, while Sora never abandoned what was important to him, striving to balance between valuing his past and personal growth like Ariel had at the end of Atlantica, and like he had done throughout the story. Failing to see his own weakness, Riku would turn to more darkness, to Ansem, for greater strength, cutting away his contradictions that were his connections altogether, and that included Maleficent, which is ironic given that it was her that taught him to take advantage of his connections for power. In the end, it was her own manipulation that led to her downfall. Facing Riku once again, Sora would quickly realize what opposed him was no longer his best friend, but someone else entirely, Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness, the true antagonist that represented everything Sora had opposed up until this point. The person in front of him no longer wanted to save Hikari, or even refer to her by name, but as a princess of heart, merely viewing her as a means to an end. And while Sora would briefly falter after Ansem used his connection and guilt against him, that Hikari had been trapped within Sora all along, only seeing their bond as a source of weakness, it was for that very bond that exists that Sora had to protect Hikari more than ever, finding the conviction to stand up and overpower Ansem. Defeating Ansem in Riku's form by himself, he proved that his strength didn't come from just physical numbers, but from their intangible bonds, surpassing Riku, who was truly alone. The path Sora had taken, just like at the start of the story where he was the last one to arrive on the island, while maybe less efficient, was definitively proven to be more effective and true to the cause, saving Hikari in both cases, almost to a fault. Seeing no other way to save Hikari, we see Sora's self-sacrificing tendencies appear for the first time, a strong sense of selflessness where he'd give up his life for his friends. Willingly sacrificing himself to the darkness, like Ansem, he retained some semblance of human consciousness and intelligence. But unlike Ansem, he did not sacrifice others in pursuit of knowledge and power, and it was completely free of malice and selfishness, so his darkness could not reach those he was trying to protect, and it was his light that did instead. Helping Sora, Riku's light would also finally reach where it needed to, seeing the errors of his ways and how far he had strayed from his original ideals. Hurting his friends wasn't something he ever wanted, and while he could not overcome Ansem, he could repress him long enough for Hikari to escape. Sensing Sora's heart following her, Hikari would reciprocate his feelings, sacrificing her safety to help him find his way back. In the end, it wasn't just the strength of Sora and how much he valued his friends that would fix everything, but all his connections mutually giving it their all for him as well, grateful to realize that, just as important his friends were to him, he was important to them. Now all was left was to save Riku, as no matter how much he had lost himself, Sora believed through his experience and the connection he shared that he could save him, promising Hikari he'd return. Traversing through the end of the world, the story was at its most hopeless, witnessing what was left of all the worlds that were completely consumed by the overwhelming darkness. No new connections could be made here, no life to be saved, just desolation, and the Heartlesses were at their strongest. But Sora would not lose hope, moving forward for a friend that needed him and for a promise he made. Facing Ansem on Destiny Island, Ansem would emphasize the flaws and weaknesses of a heart through Riku, that it is its inevitable nature to seek for something selfishly, gravitating towards the light that will create a greater shadow. Obsessed with understanding the heart, Ansem had studied, experimented and sacrificed both himself and others to reach the conclusion he did, that a heart simply desired to return to whence it came. Although he may have understood the heart on a scientific level to a degree, more than Sora did, his understanding was incomplete and corrupted, only seeing it from the perspective of the cold, fruitless Heartless he had become, failing to see alternate perspectives. After all, he was a Heartless preaching about hearts. Because like what Sora had learnt in Halloween Town and what the real Ansem would eventually realize, there's far more to a heart than what science could ever logically explain alone. While he despised ignorance, it was he who became too arrogant to see his own. One without a heart cannot understand a heart. Where Ansem had manipulated so many hearts callously to study it, unable to respect Sora's perspective that was made with so few sacrifices, Sora had come to understand it empathetically. Where Ansem had learnt what he knew alone, Sora had done it together with others. Where Ansem was so obsessed with the past, Sora saw things for how they were now. Darkness might be inevitable for every heart, even Sora accepts its weakness, but that isn't all there is to it. Because just like the story of the past Kairi's grandmother always told, just a small fragment of hope, of light, always perseveres with the potential to rebuild what was lost. And Sora's entire journey was proof of this, from those in Traverse Town who escaped destruction, continuing to endure in hope, and Riku who still kept fighting no matter how lost he became, to Sora himself who found his way back to the light. That light was their connections, and every single one Sora had made was giving it their all to grow and rebuild. Abandoning the humanity Ansem or Xehanort once had, he abandoned the very noble and human reasons for why he had originally fought for Kingdom Hearts in the first place, now corrupted, only valuing power, the past and the darkness that he believed he'd gained from it. But Kingdom Hearts, the heart of everything, wasn't darkness, it was light, proving his thesis wrong, exposing his contradictions and defeating him. Together, with Sora, Donald, Goofy, Mickey and even Riku, they would save the world and seal the door to darkness, restoring all that was lost with their connections, their light, reliving the tale of the past. However, even after Ansem's defeat, he would linger, too heartless to admit that his path was wrong, too arrogant and fixated on the past to change, only seeing Riku for who he was, the weak, desperate boy who once relied on him and his ideals. When in reality, Ansem was the one that relied on Riku who had long surpassed him. While Ansem only saw Riku as a vessel to be used, Riku saw Ansem as an important lesson to be embraced. Like Sora, Riku would learn to accept the darkness in his heart to an even greater degree, not as something to suppress or be consumed by, but to tame. And he would learn to properly value his connections, not as tools, but as those to fight alongside with, able to protect his friends as he had vowed. And before Ansem knew it, he had watched Riku grow up both literally and metaphorically, completely outliving his need for Ansem's presence. In his genuine final moments, after being defeated so many times by that same light, Ansem finally finds it in himself to admit that the strength Riku found was far greater than darkness, than him, finding pride in the man that stood before him. Recalling the scientist in him, Ansem's parting word would be to move on and to seek for something greater, something he wasn't able to do himself, learning from Riku who was able to change, attaining something more valuable than his knowledge, and cherishing the journey he had with them. In a sense, finally learning to embrace his connections. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. This will be the first part of a series of Kingdom Hearts analysis videos I'm planning to make, all leading up to one big one surrounding the conclusion of the Darkseeker saga, and there'll probably be more beyond. So I'd appreciate it if you could stay tuned for that. Take care and I'll see you in the next one.